wear my parky cover, but I had surgery 6 weeks ago and I can't quite lift this arm above my head, so I can't put this on. Because hers has a zipper. I have another one at home that has a zipper that goes up, and I'm able to wear it, and I forgot all about it, and then I called my dad, grab one of these for me, and he didn't grab the one with the zipper, so I can't. So this is one of the parky covers one of the ladies, Leona Mayak, made for me after our first field trip to the island. So I'll just set this down for now. Now, back in even as early as 1999, actually 1997, well, first of all, I say what Kim and I are going to talk about is just a very small part of a much larger project that was funded by the National Science Foundation. So we're going to talk about birds, and I should say that Kim has collected most of the information from the elders. I was busy either administrating the project or collecting information specifically about place names. But Kim did most, well, not most, but all of the work about birds. So I want to give credit where credit is due. Anytime we do have quotes or things about birds in here from the island itself, it's from Kim. I was the one who took the stuff from the old literature that I knew about to bring in and to fill in the gaps in the knowledge. So at any rate, so we're going to be talking about the birds of King Island. You can see on the left is a ivory carving of birds sitting on top of heads of men mostly. Then that's a picture of the island. That's King Island. It's located in the Bering Strait, about 85 miles northwest of Nome. It is about 2.5 miles long and 1.5 miles wide. You can't see the village right now. And on the right is actually 2 of the 3 elder men in that earlier picture are now deceased. Both of them took cancer. And I just, my surgery was related to cancer too. So this is where King Island is located. I should just tell you that this dot is much bigger on this map than what it actually is in person. But this is so you get an idea of where it's located up in the Bering Strait region. So the goals overall for the project, and then I'll turn it over to Kim, who will talk about the birds. The overall goals of the project, it was originally suggested to me by Maureen Saklamana in 1997. At that point in time, I was working on my dissertation, which was on the King Island wolf dance. And right in the middle, she was telling me that her husband, Ugi Nina, was a dancer in the 91 performance, and he died suddenly. And then she said her grandson was named after him. But then all of a sudden she points up at this picture on the wall, which was a rock, and she said, "See that place? It's Nyaksaksiapak. That rock is old maiden or big maiden. We need to get elders out to the island as soon as we can before more elders pass away." So that was the genesis for me for this project. Fortunately, I should say that back in the 80s, they had collected a lot of the place names from King Island under the Eskimo Heritage Program. At that point, they collected over 180 names. Today, we were only able to collect about 160-some names. But anyway, no one has lived on the island since the mid-1960s, and the purpose of the project, it was a NSF grant. I finally got a small grant through the Connecticut University system in '99, and I documented 50 names. And then when I finally got my feet on the ground here in about 2001, I started writing the grant proposal to NSF, and I brought in other people because based upon the 50 names that I collected, I thought I was just going to get a list of names. You go to elders and say, "Can you tell me the names of this place or the name of that place?" But what I got the name, but I also got a lot of other information, among them birds, and among them plants, among them information about old archaeology sites, about old village sites, old burial sites. And I realized that, hey, I don't have the expertise. I was trained as a Western scientist in anthropology, Western social scientist, very narrow focus. Folklore was my interest. Ornithology wasn't. And I realized quite quickly that I did not have the expertise to really fully document these aspects of the King Island environment. So that's when I brought in other people to help me do this. Kim Nelson was one of them. She documented the birds. Jesse Ford helped document the plants. We have some archaeologists in Alaska who helped us to map and also to help us get the old burial sites and document some of the old village sites that are on the island. So that was the purpose of the grant. It was a $600,000 NSF grant. It was a pretty significant investment by Arctic Social Science at that time, and still is, actually. So we just finished. It took us 7 years. We finally got funded in the fall of 2003. We had some initial field work in 2004. 2005 and 2006 was actually when we were on the ground doing work. And from 2007 to 2010 is when we were processing data. So that was the goals of the project. I'm going to turn it over now to Kim because, as I said, I didn't have the expertise. Kim was our local ornithologist who had the expertise that would help us with birds.
Thanks, Deanna. Yeah, we're gonna be going back and forth, talking about different parts of the project. So, the specific goals related to birds, and these were joint goals that both the community was interested in and I was interested in, was to document the Inupiat bird names, to determine the place names of the colonies and collecting sites where they like to go hunting, to create a bird guide of King Island that the young King Islanders could use to identify birds when they visit the island or go out to Cape Woolly, which is on the Seward Peninsula. To document the folklore related to the birds. I wanted to find out about what they knew about the ecology of birds on the island, and the elders were interested in learning what I knew about bird ecology. And then the elders wanted to share their hunting techniques and talk about their favorite places to go hunting on the island. So we conducted a bunch of interviews between 2005 and 2009, and I guess we did some of the interviews in 2004 as well. And this was my first traditional ecological knowledge project, and I was trained as a Western scientist and have done all of my science up until this project in the Western manner, and I was so impressed by what the elders knew that in future projects I will always involve the local natives in the project and find out what they know. The elders, through their interviews, knew about the arrivals of the birds on the island and their chronology on the island. And they could tell me that the snowbird, which is the white bird with the black wings up there, was the first to arrive on the island. The only bird that overwinters on King Island is the raven. All the other birds leave and they return in the spring and summer, and then they leave again in the fall, and there's some birds that are migrants. But the snowbird was the first to arrive on the island, and we'll talk a little bit about the folklore associated with that bird in a minute. The common murres were the next to arrive in late April and early May. Here's a common murre on the cliffs there. And there were a lot of other birds that arrived during that time period. And the common murre was a very important bird to the King Islanders, as I'll point out shortly. And there were other birds that passed by in the spring and fall. The hunters knew when they came and where they could go to hunt these birds. They go out in their umiaks and kayaks and get some of the ducks and loons and stuff that pass through in migration. And the elders knew a lot about the habitat of the birds, where they would be found, what were the best cliffs, where the most birds were on the cliffs, and a lot about their behavior. So they knew the best habitat places for the birds and the most reliable places to hunt the birds. They knew the best times of day or night to catch or hunt them. They went out and get the cormorants at night, which I'll talk about in a little bit, because they were easier to catch at night than during the day. They would catch other birds with nooses or nets, and they knew the best techniques to use based on their behavior in order to catch them, whether they reach under a rock, use a net, or have to go out into their boat. So an amazing amount of knowledge. We were able to make a list of hundreds of birds that occur on King Island, most of them having Inupiat names. They recognize most of the birds that were important to them, and then some of the birds, like the shorebirds, they just had one or two names for all of the shorebirds. But anyway, it was interesting that a lot of the bird names were meant something. They were either based on size. The word rock means little, and so the least auklet was a little murre because they look very similar to each other. Here is a murre, and this is a least auklet. And the dovekie was also like a little murre. And then there's pock, which means big. So you had a small gull and you had a big gull. And you had the eagle, which was a big bird. There were also names that translate based on color. This is the red phalarope here. Color meaning means a very red and blood color. And then the pelagic cormorant, the name means sooty, based on their black plumage. And then there were a lot of birds that were named based on what their call sounded like. The tundra swan, kagruk, they make a sound called kagruk, kagruk, kagruk. And so that was the name. Now I'm going to play a little part of an interview with, let me see if I can get this to work right, with Deanna's uncle, Alex, and he is not talking about the calls of the birds, but he is imitating the calls of the birds. And these, a lot of the elders knew exactly what the call sounded like of all the different birds.
Horn poppen. Black-legged kittiwake. Irak. Murs utput. Cross the dock, back to cross the dock.
And place names, there are a lot of place names on the island, but there aren't as many associated with birds, but there were some. And this is a picture of the first one, Kanu Vaktuat. Yeah, I don't speak the language that well, but this was a place where they could reach under and get the birds out from the rocks. And then there was another place where you could get crested auklets and Kayukuk. And a lot of the seagull cliffs, the cliffs around the side of the island, were places where there were the kittiwakes. Israelite. And it was very interesting. We, in hiking around the island, found a lot of bird blinds that were used in hunting. That they would stack up a bunch of rocks and then hide behind them and either use nets and today using guns to get the auklets in the colonies. And it's interesting that bird blinds were like this were also found up on the Diomedes. They use a lot of hunting tools for catching birds, throwing spears, throwing the bola when they went out on the boat. They could catch the ducks that way. So they taught a lot and talked a lot about the tools that they used for hunting. So now Deanna is going to talk about some of the folklore.
So as I said, I mostly, Kim collected a lot of the information specifically about the folklore related to birds. So you'll hear at first from Kim, then you'll hear some from me because some of the folklore is folklore that I'm familiar with. And I'm not sure where we'll go from there, but at any rate, the birds featured pretty prominently in folklore. It also featured pretty prominently in our art. They're especially further south, although there was some documentation Bird feathers and bird skins featured pretty prominently in the bags. You can see this loon skin parka. This was made a little bit further south from us, but it was definitely bird clothing was something that people made. A lot of these carvings that you see on the top center were made by King Island men, and a lot of them are seabirds. Down below is Teddy Mayek's carvings, and he specializes in he's one of the elders we consulted with quite a bit, and he specializes in the carving of birds. It's interesting, I've yet to do a project on this, but someday I'd like to think about and ask people, if you're a carver, do you concentrate on one type of carving or another? Because it's, anecdotally, I'd have to say that, this carver carves birds, this carver carves the shamans, the half people, half animal people. This person does, the wolf dancers, that person does this. So anyway, Teddy has got the birds there. You've seen this carving of, what bird is that? Puffins in the cliffs up there. The bird beliefs. So birds featured, they were pretty prominent in the folklore all over the region in western Alaska, from the north all the way down to the south. Bird bones and feathers were powerful hunting charms. Sometimes people might wear them in amulets. I don't think I've mentioned that, but if a bird helper spirit was one of their helper spirits, they would have the amulet of that bird or their claw or their bones in their amulet that they would carry around with them. If a hunter was out hunting, if he wore a mask or a hat, he could change his identity from that of a hunter to a bird. So to other animals, he would look like a bird. And bird bones and feathers were also said to impart abilities such as speed, clear sight, and the ability to live on land, sea, and air. And birds were special this way because birds could fly in the air, they could exist on the land, and there are a few birds, especially seabirds, that could actually swim underwater. So they were unusual because there weren't very many animals that lived in these three different realms like they did. On King Island, the feathers and beaks were used in our dance regalia. Feathers appeared on the eagle feather. You don't see it in this picture. You might in a later picture. But these wolf dancers, when the eagle wolf dance starts, they're wearing eagle feather headdresses. And at some point in the song, the drum just sort of snaps like this, and they bounce backwards into this wolf den. You can see this wolf den here, and there's holes. And they bounce into those holes, and then when they come out with the heads of wolves dancing. And that has to do with the story of the eagle wolf dance and how we got the gift of singing and dancing and feasting from eagles and wolves. Feathers were also placed on the chin. You can see, it's probably small for you, but in this picture you could see that there are feathers on the chin of the wolf mask, and that feather, those feathers were said to be the wolf breathing. So as the wolf head was dancing and moving around back and forth, the feather was moving, and that feather simulated breath. So that's how they knew that the wolf was really alive and that the dancers were really wolves. Then the women who are standing up on top of the dens are using wands, and they are in time to the dance beat. And again, those wands are tipped with the feathers of birds. Yeah. I'm going to turn this over to Kim.
All right, so I mentioned that the snowbird was the first bird to arrive. Well, it was an important bird because it was the first to arrive and meant the coming of spring, that the snow was going to melt and that there was an opportunity for more food and a variety in their diet, because they did eat the birds and eat the eggs of the murres and the gulls and the cormorants. So there was a song and a dance that was associated with the snow bunting. There's also a story by Dorothy G. Ray that talks about Snowbird created man, who then created 4 other men in the 4 cardinal directions. These 4 then created the rest of the population. So the story is that Snowbird was the beginning of everything, so a very important bird in their stories. And the significance of it, as I mentioned, was the coming of spring and the promise of the change in the diet. And I'm going to play another tape here. There are 2 greetings given here. The first one is the snowbird, and the second one is for the myrrh, which I'm going to talk about in a second. So these are greetings, chants that were made when the birds first arrived on the island. First snowbird and then the myrrh.
Yeah. Birds. Oh, Lilliput, we always be singing away when they arrive.
So after the snowbird arrived, it was a good chance for the kids to learn how to hunt. So they would go out with their bow and arrow and try and shoot a snowbird. They didn't eat them, but they practiced their hunting with them. And when a kid would shoot a bird, they would get a notch in their bow, and those with more notches were better hunters. So Atpa was the second greeting there. O Lilliput. It expresses that they're glad to see them because, again, they ate the myrrhs, they ate the eggs of the myrrhs, and it was a very exciting time to have spring coming. There's a dance and a song associated with the myrrh, but there are no words to that song. It's more of a chanting. The significance of the myrrh was that it was the second only to the snowbird to arrive on the island. They were prized for their eggs, and they ate the adults. And again, it was significant because it was the arrival of spring. Also for the puffins, both the tufted puffin and horned puffin, both which occur on the island, there was no song or greeting, but they did put the beaks of the birds on the mittens. And here's a picture of the mittens with the puffin beaks. It would make a shaking sound, and they used it in their dances. There's also a story from Point Hope, where the shaman had outspread feet of a puffin on its gloves, and it had good success in salmon fishing. The significance was that the birds were abundant, they were easy to catch, and the beaks were used in rattles, and they were also used on the fishing lures, which ties back to the story from Point Hope about success in salmon fishing. And then the sandhill crane was a migrant. They don't nest on King Island, but they migrate up the coast of Alaska, cross the Bering Sea, and actually nest in Siberia. And there was a greeting for when the cranes flew across. And they will land on the island and forage, but most of them are flying by. And it's interesting because there's a story of the cranes stealing babies and children, and the King Islanders are actually very afraid of cranes. And I think it was more that their size, their large size, and if you do approach them, they are aggressive and will try and get you with their beak. So the significance of the cranes was that they were aggressive and scary and tall, especially in relation to a young kid. And then I mentioned that they migrated to Siberia. So Deanna's going to take over about the raven.
We chose this partly, again, because I have some familiarity with this. I have a lot of my cousins and my younger brother do the raven dance, and a lot of my female cousins do the lady raven dance. So we do know that there are 2 songs and dances related to the raven, as well as the raven mask. Now, this mask is actually down at the U of O. I just Googled King Island raven mask and found this, and then I found out they attributed it to the Yupik Eskimos, and it was like, no, no, no. So I emailed the curator right away and said, you guys gotta get it right. It's a Nupiaq. It is from King Island, but it's a Nupiaq. So this was by Charlie Mayak. His son, Earl Mayak, actually told me the story of the Eagle Wolf dance back in '97. But Charlie was actually one of the first King Islanders to actually appear on television in 1958, I think it was. Anyway, so Charlie Mayak has this raven mask. The men, there are two versions of the song, or there are two verses, and sometimes the men might only do the first version. And that's a verse where there's only chanting syllables or singing syllables. You know how like we go la 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 la. You know, that doesn't really have words that can be translated into English, but they're still used in our songs. It's the same way with the Raven Dance. Then sometimes the men, if there's time, the men will do the second verse. And the second verse of the song says, "You men on the ground," and he's sort of hovering above. He says, "I see you from above. That is why I fly over. Where are your friends?" And then the men sort of, when they dance, they will bring their hands up and down, and then they go, "Caw, caw, caw," to end the dance. The lady raven, women, when they dance, they don't move their feet. Their feet are pretty stationary. But I remember when women do it, they do that caw, 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 caw. And their hands go opposite, or their hands go down when their legs go down, and their hands come up when they go up. So they go caw, 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 caw. And this is one of the, I need to translate this song. I'm interested in it. I'm going to try to get it from my cousins when I see them in Nome this summer. So there are two songs and dances related to the Raven Dance. It's the men that use the mask in the dance. Now, Raven Father was featured really prominently, not just in Raven myths all over Northwest Coast, all through Alaska, but Raven was pretty prominent for King Island in the Bering Strait region. He created Earth plus all the other animals. Interestingly enough, a story collected by Edward Nelson in 1880, I think, did say that it was Raven who created man. And then he created 4 men, and then they populated the earth. The story that Dorothy Jean Ray collected was in the 1950s, and she said it was Snowbird who did this. So you could say it's a product of the time in which the story was collected. It could just be the difference in the storyteller. Someone may have heard Raven, someone may have heard Snowbird. But at any rate, Raven is credited with creating and peopling the world, peopling it with plants and animals. He's in about at least 15 stories that Nelson collected, and you just find Raven all over the place. Raven was never hunted. Now, this is the one story my uncle told me, Uncle Alex, that you heard earlier doing the bird calls. He lives in Portland now, but he said when we were growing up, we were told never, ever, ever to hunt raven. And from the King Island perspective, I said, well, why? Why was that? And he said, well, I don't know, but I tend to think that it was because Raven taught us Raven was the one who showed us the way to other animals to kill. So especially in the wintertime, if you're out on the moving sea ice looking for seals in open ice leads, sometimes you could find them because you could spot the raven flying up above in the air, and they would then say, oh, there must be a seal over there, maybe a polar bear, so I'm going to go over to that direction rather than off to the south to look for this animal. But also Nelson said that there's an old Bering Strait belief that killing a raven would bring bad weather. So the significance of this bird was that it was a creator, it was present all winter, it was a very hardy bird, and again it was a bird that nobody hunted. Now my subject of my dissertation was the eagle-wolf dance. And, you know, if you want to read all 300 and some pages, you're welcome to it. But fortunately, a Greenlandic Eskimo man was able to, his name was Knud Rasmussen. In 1924, he actually collected the story of the ritual and the story from a King Island man about the eagle-wolf dance. And the story itself just said that eagles gave us the gift of song and dance. So a hunter was killing a giant eagle, And sometime later, he went out hunting again. He took very good care of the skin. But another eagle approached him and said, "Don't talk, I need to take you to my mom. My mom is going to teach you all of these things, singing and dancing and feasting." And so that was the start of the Eagle Wolf Dance, and that's why it's performed today, is that it helps us remember how to make peace with people, how to sing, how to dance, and how to feast with others. In this picture, this is actually the people from Coeric, so a little further inland. They were our trading partners. This is where the Eagle Wolf Dance actually started. The men in the front, you can see their eagle feather headdresses. The women behind, they might have staffs or wands with eagle feathers. And up above, you'll actually see also birds in their bodies, kind of hanging from the ceiling. The drum the eagle mother taught them to make, you can see the claws of the eagle on the side of the drum. The eagle is symbolized in the center. There's an eagle feather up on the staff, and that was the staff where they took the drum. And I want to say crooked, I guess. What looks like mountain peaks are symbolized mountain peaks. It's the Sawtooth Mountains where the eagles came. So Nelson and others give many stories of Thunderbird, or a giant eagle who was dangerous and big, including this giant eagle who approached the hunter. It was very big. There are pictures of giant eagle or Thunderbird actually going... It's in there, mostly the scrimshots in the etchings on the ivory carvings. But you see this giant bird picking whales up out of the ocean and using them to kill them. It could kill reindeer, it was so big. So cormorants, we do have a story in King Island Tales about cormorants. Now cormorants as a food were very tough to eat, but in the fall time, after all the other birds had left, cormorants would be left, and that's when they would hunt cormorants. So the significance of cormorants is mostly that they existed in the cliffs, and people would go and hang themselves. You know, they would dangle by ropes down the cliffside and get the cormorants and just grab them by the neck sometimes and kill them. The greeting that they had with this was, "You with the long, thin neck, I see your head." And that was the greeting that they would give to cormorant. And again, the significance was in the fall time, most of the other birds had left, and they were the only birds around, one of the only birds around that they could hunt. So again, it was an animal that enabled them to flesh out their diet a little bit more. And that's where we find the significance. There's more to the story, but I won't go into it here. I just wanted to say that what's really interesting is that the auklets, they're one of the few birds that were prized. They were abundant, they were easy to capture, they were good tasting. What did they kill? Was it krills?
Yeah, they eat krill, so they were better tasting than the fish-eating birds.
Yeah, but we don't have any greetings and we don't have any songs or dances. And this is something, again, that we'd like to follow up on to find out, well, why isn't it? If this animal features really prominently in their physical lives, why isn't there a piece of folklore attached to it? And so we'll leave you with these thoughts that there's some value in TEK. You know, that other people have probably already spoken to. I'm sorry I couldn't come here today. Yesterday I was back-to-back meetings, and this morning I had back-to-back meetings too. But the TEK is valuable because it tells us about interrelationships in the ecology of the environment. It's important because it also tells us about the interrelationships between humans and the environment. Which, you know, us in the Western world tend to think of humans as above the environment. We do things to it, but we're not part of it. But for, you know, the people who live on the land like this, they're very much a part of the land, and their knowledge of the land shows it. And it also tells us something about their belief system. And that's what I was trying to get at with the folklore and looking specifically at some of the older beliefs that people had. I wanted to know more about what people thought about birds and what their beliefs regarding birds were. Those beliefs exist, but I think we haven't asked them yet. But I think it's still an important thing. I'm teaching another class, an honors college class, where we're looking at TEK in Western science. And in TEK, one of the boys said, he was reading an article from the Maori about genetically modified plant foods, and he came up. He says, I was really impressed because it wasn't just about the science or the phylogeny of these plants that the people were eating, but it was about their morality too. And that's what we're missing, I think, in the Western science is that connection to the morals and the spirits of the people. And that's what TEK can give us. Jesse, I think, sometimes has used the term traditional ecological knowledge and wisdom, that there's something there that we don't talk about, but I think needs to be brought to the fore. This is just a list of community members. This is a huge project. We had over 50 community members and around 10 or so scientists working with us at various times. It was a very big project over a few years. And so yeah, we'll just end with this shot of the island. You can see the village. Only 5 or 6 of the houses are still viable. And this elder is now gone. That's Uncle Gabe. He died in 2006, and Earl just died last year. Both of them a cancer. But these two men actually, Sulu calls you probably weekly, right? I really wanted our scientists to create their own relationships with people. I didn't want them always to go through me, so I was really glad that Sulu kind of latched on to you guys.